floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Kurt. And good morning to people in our time zone, and good afternoon, evening, or pre-dawn to people in other places around the world. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to be talking about maximizing Drupal 8 performance with NGINX. As I'll show in a moment, we actually recently did a blog post on this topic, and we have quite a few people using Drupal 8 and NGINX together. You can find a fair amount of information on the web just by typing some words that look like this title into Google, and we're very happy about that. What we've tried to do is pull together some of the best and most relevant information, but it's not just a matter of details, it's also a matter of perspective. For instance, strictly speaking, this slide title is a lie because, depending on how you interpret it, because we don't actually change the performance of Drupal 8 itself. Drupal 8 does what it does. What we do is offload Drupal 8. We help you set up so that you can run several servers running Drupal 8 in parallel, handling all your traffic. There's an old saying, watch out what you wish for, you might get it. And that's one of the things that's really true with Drupal 8 and all the other PHP-based frameworks when used online. Because if you're launching a blog for your friends, then you're never going to have a problem with Drupal 8 and performance, because the pages will get ginned up and served, as people log in and use your blog. But when you're using it the way it's more and more intended, for very complex web applications that get very busy and that have a lot of side-to-side traffic, talking to other servers and talking to back-end databases as well as to the actual user, then it's very easy for Drupal 8 performance to max out. And without NGINX, that can be a devilishly hard problem to solve. But with NGINX and a little fresh perspective, it's actually fairly easy once you get over a hump. And that's what we're here for today, is to help you get over the hurdle of how to look at your setup with Drupal 8 to get the most performance out of it. Now, a few of you may already be on this and be onto details of how to maximize your Drupal 8 performance when you've already got NGINX up and running, and we're happy to address that too. Okay, let me get started. I'm Floyd Smith. I'm technical marketing writer for NGINX, and I'm the author of our new blog post, 8 Tips for Drupal 8 Performance. It took me a month to do the darn thing. It's a complex topic, and there's a lot to learn. And in doing the blog post and in this presentation today, Faisal Memon is working with me, and Faisal's actually is the main technical source. I'm good at identifying what the problems are and then rustling up the solutions and putting them all together. We'll be talking about some things, including what's new in Drupal 8, how you can implement a high-performance site, and how do NGINX and NGINX Plus fit into your efforts. Let me address the difference between NGINX and NGINX Plus here. NGINX is open source web server software that's extremely popular. It's used by more than 140 million websites. And basically, NGINX is the higher performance alternative to Apache. Configuration is different between NGINX and Apache, and that's the reason that people usually don't switch to NGINX until they have a performance issue, or they learn NGINX and then they just use it with everything because it works great. I'm not going to go into details here, but if you look at the blog post, there's actually a link to a book chapter that explains how NGINX was architected, how it's different, and why it can have orders of magnitude, literally greater performance than Apache, which is not a knock on Apache, it's just a performance difference. Apache was written to be easy to use, easy to configure, and very understandable, whereas NGINX was written to serve thousands and thousands and thousands of people at a time without even having a problem. And then if you ever get to where NGINX is overloaded, you just put some more servers running NGINX. So it's designed for massive scalability. I'm going to summarize first what's new in Drupal 8. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back. I didn't talk about how NGINX Plus differs. NGINX Plus is a commercial product. We charge what we consider a small amount for it. It includes support and access to our people here. Also, we pre-build NGINX Plus. Rather than just give you the source code for you to compile yourself, we compile it. We have modules that run against NGINX Plus, so it's still quite extensible. The other thing about NGINX Plus is we have a few additional features, and those largely come up in the load balancing area, also in monitoring and management of your site when you have multiple servers. Faisal will mention a couple of these things as we get into them, but usually we just talk about NGINX and then we'll point out the things that are NGINX Plus specific. It's a great time saver to start with NGINX Plus if you're new to NGINX, because the support can just save you hours and hours, and then you have the extra features you need to do an optimal implementation right off the bat. All right, what's new in Drupal 8? There are improvements for mobile. There's full support for mobile site templates, and I think this is showing off a little bit, but I understand they've done a good job. You can actually administer Drupal from your smartphone, which is pretty impressive. They've uncoupled the data and the presentation layer, and that actually is a good step for performance, among other things. So the API is now fully RESTful, and it's easier to use with tools like Angular.js, Ember.js, and tools that currently exist and are yet to be invented. The Drupal world is growing, and the complexity of sites is growing, so the tool set that you can use with that is growing, and people like us are interested in working with Drupal people as the sites get bigger, stronger, and more impressive. Symfony 2 is an object-oriented PHP framework. Everybody's trying to tame PHP a bit and make it better behaved in high-performance situations, make it a little more predictable, a little more standardized, and Symfony 2 is part of that. Twig is a library and template engine, so again, evolving PHP into the future, Twig will help you do that. And security improvements, there's a number of security improvements. We're not going to talk too much about security today, but I'll just introduce the topic by saying that NGINX is a great tool to use to increase your site security, and there's a lot that we could talk about. It's not Drupal 8. Most of our security features are not Drupal 8 specific, so they're not too much of a topic for today. But if you do use NGINX, there's a lot you can do on both sides to secure your site better. So planning your site architecture, and this is where we actually have customers and friends who run into this issue. People are used to the idea of having a web server running usually Apache and running a tool like Drupal or WordPress or another PHP engine or any number of other application servers that aren't based on PHP. And it's a pretty simple model, and the web server is all on one machine, and you can get a pretty high performance machine, but there's a lot of potential performance problems. You can also run your database on a separate server for higher performance still, but you're still asking the application server to do a lot, especially if the same server is running your web server. And when performance issues come up, it's very hard to fix them just by throwing more hardware at it past a certain pretty low point. So when you're doubling the use of your site every couple months, you will quickly get into a place that you can't get out of by increasing the size of your server or trying to simplify or tune your application. And that's where we come in, frankly. So evaluate your current site traffic and performance, and then see what your goals are for future growth. Many people don't know enough technically to fix the performance problems that come up when they arise, and then they're really stuck because, say you're heading into a holiday season with an e-commerce site, just for example, you don't have time to suddenly learn a bunch of stuff. So that's part of the reason for starting to use NGINX early in your site's life, so that you've got everything humming so that it's easily scalable when you need to. Also, learning NGINX for one site can help you tool yourself up for other sites and other things that you might want to do as well. So we're seeing more of that preventative kind of, or looking forward kind of learning. So look at what you're going to be needing and consider the capabilities of both open source NGINX and NGINX Plus, and we're going to talk about each of these areas, we meaning Faisal, because he's quite technically expert, as a web server, reverse proxy server, load balancer, and also terminating TLS, SSL, and HTTP2. and a lot of other growth capabilities that are possible with NGINX and NGINX Plus. Then look at your likely speed of growth, be ready for it, get out in front of it, and then factor in the cloud. More and more of the web is moving to the cloud. Amazon Web Services is the best known service. It's hugely popular. VMware is the leader in private cloud. Many sites now are growing into the cloud, which means that you run the site on the servers that you've already bought and paid for. You're not going to throw them out. But then when you get more traffic than those servers can handle, you enlist the use of servers that are in the cloud. So you only pay for the instances you're using while you're using them, and you only pay for them when you're actually running a lot of traffic that would otherwise be causing performance issues for your customers. So that's kind of a brilliant strategy, and we actually have specific configurations to take advantage of that. So think through all those things. Have some conversations with people, again, if possible, before you run into problems, because then you'll have a strategy in mind for what you want to do and how you want to expand. And the next topic is replacing your web server. And I'm going to speak briefly to that. So the simplest thing you can do to improve the performance of your site is replacing your web server, and let me explain why. You replace Apache with NGINX open source or NGINX Plus. This immediately increases the performance of your site. This, again, doesn't actually directly change what Drupal is doing. What it does is it takes a web server that tends to get overloaded with too much traffic, which is Apache, and replaces it with one which handles lots of traffic very well. Now, how do we do that? The details are in the way that Apache works. Apache spins up a separate process or a separate thread for each new connection that it gets. That takes time, and very importantly, it uses memory. So what tends to happen is that as you get more and more users, if your site suddenly becomes more popular, you head into holidays or another busy period, you suddenly get a lot more users, and your server's physical memory gets overloaded and it starts swapping to disk. That's just deadly, because the second that you start swapping to disk, everything slows down. And then if you get more users on top of that, more and more of them go to disk, everything gets slower and slower. And although you may still be serving users, the perceived performance of your site, people start clicking away. They start doing something else. They say, I'll come back later. They probably don't. So it's just a depressing mess. You can get more physical memory, but of course that's expensive and limited. So that's where NGINX comes in. NGINX runs on an event loop. So it doesn't assign memory to each connection. It just handles requests as they come in from however many connections there are. And so it was designed to solve a problem called the C10K problem, which is 10,000 or more simultaneous connections. So if your site is getting seized at the Apache level, then replacing your server with NGINX or NGINX Plus is a huge immediate help. It also enables all the things that Faisal is about to talk about. Once you put NGINX in, you can immediately, just as your web server running directly on, even on the same server as Drupal, you can immediately use caching, which we'll be talking about in a minute, of a couple of different kinds that are extremely relevant to Drupal. And then you can, it's an easy step from here to using NGINX as a reverse proxy server. That means a separate box. When you do that, now the Drupal machine is not doing anything except running Drupal, which is huge. The reverse proxy server is handling all the internet traffic. If caching is set up, it's handling caching. A lot of requests, so a lot of requests now never get to the server that Drupal is running on. So performance increases significantly. Also, with a reverse proxy server, you can add additional Drupal servers with some technical wizardry in order to make sure that the user has a consistent experience in their session. But we've been doing that for a long, long time, and we're quite good at it, and you'll get quite good at it as well. So the first step in improving performance for your Drupal site is simply replacing your web server with NGINX. and then you can do a lot more from there. And so we come on to Drupal itself. We're going to start with Drupal specifics and Drupal 8 configuration, and I'm going to hand it over to Faisal.
Hey, thanks a lot, Floyd. My name is Faisal Memon, and I do product marketing here at NGINX. And I'm going to take you through some of the specifics around Drupal NGINX, starting with the configuration. And if you've been investigating Drupal 8 and you're already using NGINX, you've probably already done some Google searches, Drupal 8 NGINX, and seen a lot of the stuff that I'm going to present here. But I just wanted to put it in here anyways for completeness sake. So there's minor changes to the NGINX configuration to support Drupal 8. They're mostly related to this update.php front controller, which I believe is new to Drupal 8, but that might not be correct. And we have a sample configuration that's available on our wiki site. There's a link there. It's looking a little cut off on my laptop, but we're going to send the slides out after this presentation. But if you go to that site there, we have a full NGINX configuration that you can use, maybe even just straight out if you don't have a complicated Drupal site, or you can use bits and pieces of it if your Drupal configuration is a little more complex. Okay, so moving forward, I just wanted to step through some of the changes in the configuration compared with the configuration that we provided for Drupal 7. And the first one, and first and foremost, is the changes to accommodate the update.php front controller. And where the problem would come in with the previous configurations is when you have a URL like this, it says /update.php/selection. And if you look at the location block on the left side, that's the main location block in the NGINX configuration that will go ahead and execute the PHP scripts using PHP FPM. And if you notice, for this particular one, the regex there has the $ symbol at the end, which means it's not going to match on anything that has a slash or any sort of directory after the PHP script. So this particular URL, update.php/selection, will not match there, and then the PHP script will not be run. NGINX, without the change to handle this, will return a 404 error. And then looking over to the right side, the change that we're making here is to put an OR within the regex. So now we have the original regex in there to match the Drupal and PHP scripts that were running before, but we're saying also now if the URI portion begins with update.php, we're going to go ahead and match that as well. And you notice that we don't have a $ symbol at the end of the update.php, so we'll take in all the stuff that comes in after it, match it, and run the PHP script with that. There's a different alternative that you can do. The one that I'm providing here, or at least the one that I put in the top right corner, is very specific and very strict that it will only match update.php. The less strict version that's down here will match any PHP script that has a path after it. It's more of a future-proof solution. If Drupal 9, Drupal 10, whatever comes in the future, has a URI syntax similar to what's with the update.php, you won't have to make any changes if you use the less strict version that's right there in the middle of the slide. The downside of using this is that it might break legacy Drupal URIs like the one that's listed there with /blog/index.php/legacy that will now match and will not work as it did before. So the trade-off is either more future-proof, or if you want to support legacy Drupal URIs, will lead your choice here. Okay, moving forward, the second major change is actually just the second line in the NGINX configuration after that location. It's the fast CGI split path info, which split up the fast CGI, or sorry, the PHP URI into the actual script name and then the stuff after the script. And the change here is to accommodate URIs such as the one that I've listed here, which has, I believe it's because it has a .php listed twice. And the version on the left is a greedy match, so it's going to go ahead and match the entire URI up to the second .php and try to run that, try to call out with that as a script name, and that's obviously going to be not found. So what we do on the right side is to add that little question mark there, which makes the script non-greedy, which means it'll match just the first PHP and use that as the script file name, and then the second half, or the second core/authorized.php will be the path info that's passed on as well. And the third change it's not Drupal 8 specific, but I just wanted to put it in here because there might be people moving from older versions of Drupal up to Drupal 8. Is in this location, or sorry, this the main location block, and I just see a typo on the right side here that I'm missing the slash. But in any case, the main difference is in the second half, or sorry, in the try files piece of it. With the older configuration, we're going to go ahead and send it to a rewrite block, which rewrites the URI. And then in the newer version here, we're just using, we're calling out to index.php with the query string. So the older version, the one on the left, can cause the query string to be altered, which can cause functionality to be broken. And those are the three major changes moving from older versions of Drupal to Drupal 8 that you'll need to look for within your NGINX configuration. And like I mentioned earlier, we have our NGINX wiki, and within that wiki we have a page specific to Drupal, and within that page we have a sample NGINX configuration that you can use with Drupal, which encapsulates all the information that I just presented earlier. All right, so I just want to switch gears a little bit. Now we have Drupal, we have it configured, running properly, Drupal 8 and NGINX. And I want to talk about caching a little bit. Caching is one of those things where it provides a lot of benefit to your site. And we like to say that there's two main benefits. One is that by caching the content, you're moving it closer to the user, and so they can get to it faster. But you're also offloading that work from the application servers, from the Drupal servers in this case. So now a request that would previously go and cause a PHP script to be executed on your Drupal servers is just going to be short-circuited and served by NGINX. So you get the performance improvement of that. But the thing that we maybe not always mention with caching is that you're saving a few compute cycles in the back end as well. So there's those twofold benefits of caching. So why cache with NGINX? And this screenshot here is from a BBC study that they did with their Radix caching server. And you could click on that link there or follow that link there and get all the details of what they did and the details of their setup and how they were able to get this performance difference. But comparing NGINX to Varnish, I know not against Varnish. We like Varnish. It's our open source cousin. But with the BBC testing, they're saying that with NGINX, as a drop-in replacement for Varnish, they're seeing 5 times more throughput. And that kind of goes towards NGINX and architecture that Floyd kind of touched on earlier. That was our event-driven architecture, and that the way that we handle traffic within NGINX allows us to scale to the level that other products and other projects are not always able to do so. This BBC study kind of highlights that pretty nicely for us. Microcaching. So microcaching is a term you may or may not have heard of, but it's basically saying that we're going to cache content that's somewhere in the middle here on the scale between static content, which is images, CSS, stuff that's typically easily cached and quite often put into some sort of CDN compared to stuff that's all the way on the right. Personalized content, your shopping cart, your account data, stuff that you do not ever want to cache. And in between this spectrum, there's a whole load of content, blog posts, status pages that we consider dynamic content, but it's dynamic content that is cacheable. And so by micro-caching this content, caching it for a short amount of time, even as little as 1 second, we can get significant performance gains just by doing that. Performance gains as well as reduced load on the Drupal servers. And the nice part of that is that the site content is going to be out of date for maximum of 1 second if you're micro-caching for 1 second. So that takes a lot of the typical worry of caching that I'm going to be presenting an older site to my users, or if I make a change, that I have to go through all this hassle of invalidating and purging the cache. If you're doing micro-caching, that's kind of already taken care of just by leveraging the existing caching mechanisms that are in place. And a very simple configuration here on the NGINX side that enables caching. I'm not going to step through every single line here, but I just wanted to highlight the proxy cache valid. That's the magic line here that will take in all the content that is cacheable, and then say that this content, we're going to cache it for 1 second, and then we're going to mark it as stale after that 1 second time has expired. There's some other directives on the top there that says if content is inactive for 600 seconds, which I believe is a minute. 1 minute, 600 seconds? 60 seconds. Yeah, 1 minute. 60 seconds, so if cache content is invalid for 600 seconds, sorry, my math is off today. 10 minutes. Right. It's 10 minutes? Yep. It's 10 minutes, not 1 minute. Thank you, Floyd. So if content is inactive, that means that no one has accessed it for 10 minutes, even if it's stale. It's going to go ahead and be deleted from the NGINX cache. So not to confuse things, but there's two concepts here. There's the concept of stale cache, which the proxy cache valid directive does, which marks an entry as being stale but does not delete it off NGINX. So it sits there as stale content, and we'll see why that matters in a few minutes. Then there's the inactive directive, which takes content stale or not stale, whether or not it's stale or not stale, and deletes it if it has not been accessed by a user, in this case, 10 minutes. Okay. So that's how you basically enable micro-caching within NGINX. And there's some directives based on our testing that we've determined that help out and improve performance even more in the micro-caching case. And the first directive is the proxy cache lock directive. And what that says is if there are multiple simultaneous requests for the same, either uncached or stale content, that means that that content is going to have to be refreshed from Drupal, from the origin server. Only one of those requests is going to be allowed through, the first one. And the subsequent requests for that same content are going to be queued up. And then when that first request is satisfied, the other guys will get it from the cache. So that saves some additional amount of work from happening on the back end. The proxy cache use stale directive is a fairly powerful directive, actually. What it allows you to do is serve stale content in various scenarios when cache content is not available. In this case, we're restricting it to updating, so that means that we're instructing NGINX to serve stale content when a cached entry is in the process of being updated. So that means that if a user comes in for a request, and then the content within the cache is stale, the 1 second timer has expired, NGINX is going to go ahead and refresh that content from the origin server. While that content is being refreshed, users that have come in that period of time are going to be served the stale content. So it's also a little bit more dangerous, and it could also increase the amount of time that users see stale content. But like I said, if the timer, it's being refreshed 1 second, so it's not going to impact that a whole lot. And this, like I said, is a very powerful directive. It goes beyond that. You can set this directive to return stale content in the case that NGINX can't contact the origin server. Let's say that the origin servers have gone down, there's a network partition, a server has crashed for whatever reason, NGINX can't talk to that server to update the content. Rather than saying, okay, I'm going to serve out of 404, I have this content in my cache. It's stale, I'd rather serve stale content than no content to my users. So you can configure NGINX using the proxy cache use stale to cover for potential errors on the back end. So a very powerful directive and worth looking into for Drupal or for any application. So that's micro-caching with NGINX in a nutshell. And we're going to send out a link at the conclusion of this broadcast, which has more details on micro-caching with NGINX. I wanted to make a quick mention of cache purging. We have cache purging in NGINX. There's different ways to accomplish it. You can compile a third-party module, include it into NGINX open source, and that's absolutely a fine way to do it. But for our customers with NGINX Plus, we're combining and building in a cache purging module written by the same developers that made NGINX and supported by our support team and by our engineering staff. So it gets in there pre-bundled, and there's some configuration here to enable it, but what that allows you to do is, for example, using curl, if you specify the verb as purge as opposed to get, then the URL you specified, in this case, is going to delete everything, but you can specify a specific file, for example, www.example.com/image.jpg will just delete that particular image. So you can leverage this module to get a pretty powerful cache purging mechanism included, pre-built with NGINX Plus, our commercial offering. All right, so that does it for caching. I want to talk a little bit about using NGINX as a reverse proxy. And so Floyd talked a lot about replacing Apache with NGINX, and there's a lot of performance benefits from doing that Floyd went into. But that might not always be possible to do that for various reasons. If you're pretty embedded with your Apache config, or it's working good enough for you. You don't want to go ahead, you want to go through the work of rip and replacing that. That's absolutely okay. You can use NGINX as a reverse proxy server in front of in front of Apache, and still gain the majority of the benefits of using NGINX. You can use NGINX as a one-to-one reverse proxy, as in just put it in front of a single Drupal server, or you can use NGINX in a one-to-many scenario where you have NGINX in front of multiple Drupal servers that are running either Apache or NGINX as well. In that case, when it's a one-to-many relationship, we call that load balancing. And so what NGINX will do is it will distribute load more or less equally as possible to the various Drupal nodes behind it. It also does a lot of different optimizations. The one highlighted in this particular slide is that you can have a large number of clients coming in with a large number of keep alive connections on the front end. Then on the back end, you don't need to necessarily have a one-to-one mapping of keep alive connections. So NGINX will just consolidate that down, so you can have thousands of connections on the front end, and that kind of gets whittled down to hundreds of connections on the back end. And so we're just multiplexing connections on the back end here, just to make more efficient usage of the servers on the back end. We support a variety of different load balancing algorithms, from the basic round-robin load balancing to more sophisticated algorithms that will take in the amount of connections that are currently existing on the back-end server, to even more sophisticated algorithms that will take in the response time of the application servers. Factor that into load balancing decisions. So for example, if one particular Drupal server is being bogged down or is running on a less powerful server than the remaining ones, NGINX will automatically direct traffic or less traffic to that particular server, more traffic to the other ones. So it does some sort of auto kind of accommodating for differences or for different amounts of load or different amounts of server on the back end. So a variety of different load balancing algorithms with NGINX and NGINX Plus. Session persistence is something that you may or may not need when you're scaling out and you're scaling horizontally and you have multiple Drupal servers. It may be the case that there's user state that's stored on each of these servers, in which case that you'll need to make sure that the same user goes to the same server every time, or at least for that duration of that session. So we call that session persistence. Some people also call it sticky sessions or session affinity. So there's various different names for it, but the same basic concept. Send the same user to the same server on the back end. So there's multiple ways to do it. A nice way to do it is have NGINX track an application session cookie. So if it sees this session cookie from a client, it's going to make sure to send that same client to the server that NGINX first saw that cookie come from. And so we call that a session learning persistence. So that's a great way to do it. Typical cookie people use is PHP session ID. On the Java side, it's JSession ID, so NGINX can track that particular cookie if it's present, make sure to send that same user to the server that sent that cookie out. If there's not a cookie that you can track, you can have NGINX insert its own cookie. And when it sees that cookie, it's going to send send the client to the server that it sent it to before. You can use sticky route, where you can do persistence outside of cookies based on values in the HTTP header or other values. Mostly it's going to be HTTP header, and use those values to perform session persistence. And there's a more simple IP hash, which just basically uses the IP address, and clients from the same IP address or same group of IP addresses, the same subnet, are all sent to the same server. Session persistence is an NGINX Plus feature, except for the IP hash, which is available within our open source offering. The downside of IP hash is that it's based on the network. It's based on IP address. So if you have multiple people within the same office accessing your Drupal application, they're all running off the same IP address based on that, so they're not going to be load balanced across different Drupal servers. They're all going to be sent to the same server, so the load might not be distributed as evenly as it would be with one of the more the cookie-based or one of the more elegant session persistent methods. So we also support session draining, and that means gracefully removing servers from the load balancing pool. If you need to do maintenance, you don't want to just kind of rip this thing out in the middle of processing. You want to have it gracefully shut down what it's doing, or more technical terms, just not take any new connections and process all the existing connections till completion. And then once that's done, go ahead and move it off. So with NGINX Plus, we support some nice methods for session draining. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about SSL offloading. I think, for a lot of people, the benefits are going to be obvious here. What you're doing is you're taking the SSL processing, the burden of doing that. It's computationally expensive, as we all know. Moving that away from the application servers, where probably not the best place to put it. Moving it to the edge, to the reverse proxy, to the load balancer. In this case, to NGINX. And so NGINX is going to go ahead and decrypt the traffic. And then, the other benefit of doing that, aside just from offloading the work from the servers, is that now that this traffic is decrypted, we can do stuff to it. We can do traffic inspection, we can do routing, we can insert cookies, We can look at the cookies. If you want to use session persistence, for example, you have to decrypt the traffic for NGINX to get in there and look at the cookies and look at the data. Or in general, by decrypting the traffic, NGINX can do its layer 7 work to the traffic. And then you can optionally encrypt the traffic back to your upstream servers, or you can leave it in the clear. If you encrypt it back to the upstream servers, you're obviously not getting the SSL offloading capabilities, but then you're protecting yourself against someone that has maybe hacked into your data center, hacked into your cloud environment, and has a passive probe there. If you're encrypting traffic within your data center, you're protected against potential spying by the government or other entities. And especially nowadays with security and the amount of attacks going up, we're seeing a lot more people opt to encrypt traffic even within their own data center. And like I said earlier, even if you are encrypting traffic within your own data center, there's still benefit from having traffic decrypted on NGINX so that it can do the inspections and the layer 7 work. Okay, so HTTP 2 was ratified last February 2015, so coming up on a year now. HTTP 2 gives better performance to websites without requiring you to re-architect or refactor or really make any changes on the back end, especially with NGINX. What we'll do is that we'll translate that traffic, and so we'll speak HTTP 2 on the client, or sorry, on the front end to client browsers that support it, and then on the back end we're going to go ahead and translate that back to fast CGI, UWSGI, HTTP1. Whatever language your application servers already speak. So it does this translation work for you. And what this means for the application owner is that you can move to HTTP2, like I said, without refactoring your application, gain the performance benefits of it, as well as support clients that are using older web browsers, using older mobile devices that don't support HTTP2. We can support both pretty transparently to the application owner. Moving to HTTP2, like I said, is a really nice and easy way to boost the performance of your website. Okay, and that wraps it up for the performance, and Floyd had a few things just to say on his side.
Yes, just to sum up some of what we've talked about, I know that we could have a pretty wide variety of technical backgrounds on this call. The Drupal world is getting very complex, and there's a lot going on. And you can learn a ton about PHP, you can learn a ton about site architecture and design, about information architecture. You might be using a CDN in conjunction with your site. There's additional technical depth in the web server world. Whether you go into Apache or NGINX, there's a lot to learn, and NGINX is kind of a specific area that there's a lot of knowledge in it. Part of the fun of working in a company like NGINX is that there are a lot of really smart people. Excuse me. And one of the things about the NGINX Plus offering is that you get access to them and get to talk with them. There are some things that are worth learning. If you're going to be doing them a lot, you should learn them yourself and have that expertise in-house. But if you're going to be doing them once, it's often good to get consulting or outside help. And NGINX offers part of the puzzle, you know, around some of the concerns we've talked about today. Now, the Drupal world speaks a little differently sometimes than other parts of the web development world. So just to hammer home a couple of things that we talked about today, in that regard, when you talk about using NGINX, you can talk past other people because some people, of course, use NGINX as a web server, and they get a lot of advantage out of that. But the whole thing really flies when you need higher performance, when you use NGINX as a reverse proxy server and gain the architectural flexibility that is inherent with that. So those are two different use cases. And it's important to know which one you're talking about when you talk to someone else about NGINX and which one they're talking about. The other thing is caching. In the world of website design and DevOps and everything as a whole, caching often, if you don't qualify it, caching often just means static file caching, like the caching that takes place in your browser or as a CDN will do for static files. In the Drupal world, caching is often used to mean what we would more often call micro-caching, meaning caching a page just even for a few seconds because it's basically live content, but if you try to produce that page live 100 or 200 times a second, your site's going to go down. So micro-caching for these brief periods is kind of what Drupal uses when they talk about caching. To reiterate, the advantage of micro-caching with NGINX, or as Drupal calls it, caching with NGINX, is that the caching is taking place off of the server that's running Drupal. So that server is now completely freed up, and all it has to do is generate fresh pages when fresh pages are needed. That might be every second even, but that's a lot less than hundreds of times a second when you're really busy. So if you're absorbing some of this new for the first time, it probably seems pretty complex. Those vocabulary differences are important in talking to other people, and even if you know this stuff cold and you're way ahead of us on some of this, it's still worth being aware of how people use words differently so that you can communicate better and faster. A lot of the things we're talking about, like using multiple application servers, they're going to require teams to be brought up to speed on how you intend for things to work, and so knowing how people talk is an important part of communicating with them effectively. To sum up, we offer NGINX open source and NGINX Plus. Both are very effective at solving a lot of performance problems that any site really with an application server or application architecture has, and Drupal is pushing into doing more and more for very complex and very high performance sites, and so we're a great part of your toolkit for addressing those issues. I'm going to go on now to questions, and I see that we've got just a couple of questions here, and then we'll wrap up. So the question that I have here is, do we know if there's any information about upgrading to Symfony 3? We have people here who know that world, but it's not a specific area of expertise to us. So that's not something that we can support or help with, although we understand the point of why you would want to do it, and of the changes that Drupal is making to make PHP a little more predictable, a little more manageable, so that you can then go on to do a lot more with it. Another thing I wanted to mention, just to add to, is what Faisal said about SSL, TLS, and HTTP2. We're finding that that's kind of becoming that having a secure site is becoming an expectation for more users. What they see is they're using some of the big sites, and those are secure. They've been very aggressive, some of the very largest sites, in moving to these higher security protocols, and that sets an expectation in the user's mind. So it may not seem like a big deal to secure your content-oriented site, for instance, but it actually is becoming kind of a checkbox for people, and they get nervous about things like logging into a site if they don't see the security bar there. It's a subtle factor, but it's increasing, and NGINX makes it much easier to implement these more secure protocols without your site suffering a performance penalty. We have a lot of detailed information about HTTP2 in particular. There's a blog post that we have called 7 Tips for Higher HTTP2 Performance. And if you look up that on our site, you'll learn a lot about HTTP2. We also have webinars, recorded webinars about it, and recorded speeches from our conference, and a lot more. So that's a big area. The other area that's big is just the whole area of high performance, and there's a blizzard of stuff to learn, and it's hard to make a Drupal site high performance. So we've got a start here on that for you now. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I think that we've answered the questions that were presented to us. We'll be sending you a copy of this presentation as a follow-up and some additional links to additional information. I hope that we haven't overwhelmed those of you for whom this topic is new, nor bored those of you who are already expert in it. And we look forward to hopefully working with you around NGINX going forward and Drupal as you move to Drupal 8. Thanks again.
Great, and thank you, Floyd. And ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude your session for today. On behalf of your panelists, I'd like to once again thank everyone for joining and hope you found it informative. And at this time, you may now disconnect and enjoy the rest of your day.